Hey, this is James Burk. He recently ran the Mars Society convention with, what was it, 130 speakers?
We had a total of 128 talks, over 150 individual speakers, 4-day conference. Our final registration count was just over 10,000, and it was a very successful event.
Okay, so how about start? How did you start? When did you start putting this together?
Yeah, so we run this conference every year. This was our 23rd conference, and every year around January or February, we have a committee that starts having regular video conferencing calls to begin organizing the event, deciding where it's going to be and who's going to speak at it. Usually our focus is who's going to speak at it.
Mhm.
We usually run through a list of here's all the people we'd like to have, and we'll reach out to them, and then we'll see as the months go on who confirms and who doesn't, and talk about who else we could ask. So usually, obviously Dr. Robert Zubrin, it runs that committee. He's the president of the Mars Society. And there's several people on it, including myself, Michael Stoltz, our PR director, Lucinda Offer, our executive director, Nicole Willette, Susan Martin, Carrie Fay. So all those are folks that are on our steering committee, and they're sort of our senior staff at the organization as well. So, and we've been together running that type of meetings for about 5 or so years, that group. So last year we had the conference at USC, University of Southern California. We had 400 people. We thought it was a really good event. So we were planning on doing that again. Early this year, we were just going to go back to USC and, second year there, and hopefully we'd get more people. Hopefully it wouldn't be on a weekend that the students weren't there like it happened, to fall last year. And that was our plan. And we were about to announce it. And then the coronavirus happened. And so we noticed that other groups canceled their events. For example, the National Space Society runs a conference that's similar to ours called the International Space Development Conference. I was actually part of the planning committee for that one as well. And that one was going to happen in May of this year in Dallas, Texas. And that event was completely canceled, and they did not decide to do any type of virtual event and to replace that. And I know for a fact that a lot of people were disappointed about that, including myself, who was organizing the Mars track there. And I had already gotten some confirmed speakers. So at the Mars Society, we decided that we weren't going to do that, that we would still try to put on a virtual event. Robert was always in favor of that, was always talking about having it be an event unlike any other. And he turned to me, because I'm the IT director, and he said, James, how are we going to do this? And I said, well, we're going to need to get Zoom. We've been early adopters of Zoom at the Mars Society. We've been using Zoom for about 4 years and using it for some of our projects, committees, like the Mars Desert Research Station committee that runs that, the management team. We've used Zoom calls for that for several years. We used to use WebEx, but I championed us going to Zoom because it's just a much better product, a much clearer sound and video. So, so I said, well, we're going to need to use Zoom, and we're going to need to find some type of application that will tie together everything, because it's not going to be just one big Zoom call. It's a 4-day event. We typically have track sessions in the afternoons. So we usually have 4 talks happening at once in the afternoons and evening programs. And it would be better, instead of having just one long Zoom call, that we break it up a little and allow people to hop around. And also, I also had in mind that putting it all on YouTube afterwards, which is another one of the responsibilities I have for our conferences. Usually at our in-person events, I'm running around making sure that everything's getting videoed. and making sure that the videography folks that we've either hired or tapped to be volunteers are doing a good job. And unfortunately, over the years, I've been doing that since 2011 at all of our conferences. And over the years, we've been a little hit and miss on that. We've definitely had some mistakes happen where really good talks were not captured correctly, where we had bad audio. The video is great, and someone's taking a picture of the slides, which is awesome, but then the audio sounds horrible. And so the finished product up on YouTube is not a good one. People complain about it. So that was also top of mind for me. If we're going to do a virtual event, let's make sure that we can record absolutely everything in high quality. And because we used Zoom, that was also something that we were able to do. For the event this year, we got everything up on YouTube in 2 weeks, which was a record. We had 100% coverage of everything we did, and it was all high quality sound and video. So that was a huge win for us, not just for the people that attended the event, but years from now, when people watch those talks on YouTube, they're going to have a good experience. So that was important to us as well. So I knew we needed to use Zoom. I knew we needed to have some type of application to tie everything together. And then we also still needed to go find speakers for just like we would do for an in-person event. Let me talk about that last one, speakers. We basically were able to get everyone we ever wanted to speak at one of our conferences. From Elon Musk and Jim Bridenstine, the NASA administrator, all the way down to every Mars mission happening right now in the US was represented. All the different missions at JPL were all represented at our conference, and as well as many other international teams that are working on Mars related missions and topics were all represented at our event. So we were very thrilled that because it was a virtual event, because people didn't have to travel to speak at it, we got much better speakers. There was a much lower barrier for them to participate. And so we got the Jim Bridenstines and the Elon Musks this time. And also from an attendee perspective, there's been people around the world that have wanted to come to one of our events, but they can't travel to the US or they can't afford it or whatever. And were all able to attend and participate this year. And so we had 10,000 people registered and many thousands of people watching our sessions at a time, on not only in the Zoom calls, but on YouTube, because we live streamed it as well on YouTube and Facebook. So more people were able to participate with our conference than ever before because it was a virtual event. And then finally, that application, so number 2 on my kind of 3 pillars of this was Attendify. I did an evaluation of all the different event softwares out there, all the event software vendors that enable you to do a virtual event and have an application that people log into to consume the event. I talked to all of them. I had a spreadsheet with about 30 different vendors, and I sat through a lot of sales calls, starting back in February, March, up until October this year. And what I learned is Attendify was just a really good option for us, not only because the price, they gave us a discount, and I've talked to them since the event, and they're very interested in partnering with us long term, very interested in co-marketing with us for our future events. So they look like a great partner overall, but their software experience was top notch. Their user interface was very easy to use, very easy for non-technical people to use, which was important to us, and full featured. There were lots of different ways to use the software to talk to other attendees. There was an activity feed, kind of like Facebook, where you have different people posting things that you could read through. There were speaker profiles. So all of our speakers, including for the tracks in the afternoon, submitted their bio and photos, and we were able to put all that into the application. So along with joining the event, you can actually read about the speaker and read about what their abstract was. That was all in the software Attendify. And then attendees could also put in their own information, make their own profile with their picture and their social media
Mhm.
accounts and their email accounts, or whatever they wanted to share with others. And so they could network that way just within Attendify. And that was important to us, to make it feel like, even though it's a virtual event, one of the benefits of these conferences is that you meet people and that you're able to talk about your interests and talk about working together and make those connections. We wanted to foster that. Even though it was a virtual event, we didn't want it to just be this anonymous audience watching the talks. We wanted them to have multiple ways to interact with each other, not just to ask questions of the speakers, but to actually talk to each other. And so the features in Attendify were very important for that. We
Is
also made use of a couple other tools
mhm,
to foster networking, one of which was Slack. Slack is a chat tool that we've used for several years at the Mars Society, mostly for our technical volunteers. We went ahead and opened that up and invited everybody that registered for the event and attended the event to go join us in Slack and continue the conversations. And in some cases, some of the speakers were able to go into Slack after their talk and continue talking to their audience, which we thought was great. And there's still people, even though the conference is over, we wanted that to be a permanent community for the Mars Society. And we wanted people to continue to talk to each other in there. And they're still, not to the extent that they were during the weekend of the conference, but there are still people in there talking to each other, creating conversations and connecting in there, which was great.
is Attendify going to keep the site up for the next year or so, or
That's a
how is
great
that?
question. And they are going to keep it up until June, because June is when we set it up. Last June is when we set it up, and we have a 1-year license. So yeah, the site is still up. You could still log into it. I probably, if I have time, should go in there and change out all the links to the sessions to point to their YouTube versions instead of their Zoom versions, because nobody's in the Zoom calls now. But we do have the YouTube videos up for all the sessions. So I might go do that, but it will be coming down in June, and we will archive everything that was in there, like the activity feed, for example.
Mhm,
And we probably, I would say right now, it's not decided yet, obviously, but we will probably use them again
mhm.
for whatever we do next year, whatever type of event we have, in person or virtual, again next year. We will probably use them again. So we'll talk with them closer to June about whether it makes sense to just clone that so that the same attendee set is still in there, for example.
Can a person who registered this year automatically be in there for next year?
Um, it just depends what we do for next year.
Mhm,
I have the list of people, and the people that registered, they didn't register in Attendify, they registered with Eventbrite, because we set that up first in March, and
mhm,
then later on we picked Attendify and set that up. So there was a little bit of scrambling we had to do, because the connection between the two wasn't working in early October, late September. And so I actually had to manually import all those folks that were in Eventbrite. And it wasn't that bad, but that was a little bit of a pain point I talked to Attendify about. We will not do that next time. Next time we will have the same event registration application will be in the same application we use for the convention itself, to eliminate that step.
mhm.
But we have the list of everyone in Eventbrite, and we have the list of everyone who logged into Attendify. And then a third one is our membership roles. We have over 5,000 active members. We have 12,000 people on our email bulletin list. So those are also an audience that will make sure that get into our next conference application, no matter what we do.
What were some of the back-end tools in Attendify that other things didn't have, for like
Yeah,
scheduling or?
that's a great question. I mentioned the UI of Attendify was great. Their relatively new virtual experience, they call it,
Mhm,
was top notch. It looked awesome. And that's, for me, that was the number one reason why we went with Attendify, other than the price and the discount we got. But on the back end, yeah, they have their own dashboard and tools that you use via the browser to set up the event, to set up all the sessions and the speakers and the schedule. So that's what I and others used to set up the conference. You know, we had to, for example, create about 100 Zoom calls and put those URLs into Attendify with copy paste. That was a lot of work, but we got it done before the conference. So that was all done with the Attendify dashboard, just copy pasting out of Zoom's web version. There were tools to import attendees. I mentioned from, there was supposed to be an automatic connection from Eventbrite. That wasn't working. They've since fixed that, but there was a bulk import tool that we used to pull the attendees in from Eventbrite. So we would export them out of Eventbrite into Microsoft Excel, make a CSV, a comma separated value file that had all the people's names and email addresses, and then import that into Attendify. That was not seamless. That required some manipulation on all sides to get working, and it took, I think, about 6 or 7 individual import attempts or import jobs to get all 5,000 or so people. At the beginning of the conference, we had 5,000 to get those into Attendify. As the conference was happening, because it was so successful, we ended up getting a lot more registrations in Eventbrite. And from there, people, we just told them, go to Attendify manually and sign in. Like, we're not going to import you. Just go there. Here's the code to join the event. Just type in the code, and that's how they got in. Not everybody, not all the 10,000 got into Attendify. It was probably around 5,500 or so that ultimately logged in, which wasn't that surprising because we did have a lot of stuff on the live streams, and not everybody who registers for an event actually attends an event. I'm sure you all are aware of that as well. I routinely have meetups where I have 25 or 30 people registered and have like 6 people show up. So that's normal. But yeah, backend tools, it was doing the bulk imports. It was a lot of work in the Attendify dashboard. And there were other ways to do bulk import, but ultimately we just did a lot of copy pasting out of things. Like, we had an abstract tool that people used to submit abstracts if they wanted to speak. That was a Google form, and it went into a Google spreadsheet. So I had all the speakers' contact information and abstract details in a spreadsheet, and I would copy paste that into Attendify, as well as I had a volunteer that helped me do a lot of this. He's a high school student, and he did a lot of that. Yeah, I think that answers your question.
So what tools do you think the virtual events community could use? What's like missing that nobody's filled in yet?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. I've thought a lot about this, actually, because one of the things that's happened this year, because there's more virtual events because of the coronavirus, the people that sell virtual event software are new to it. They're usually people that had a mobile app that they would use for an in-person conference, and they're trying to pivot it to be used for virtual events. And that's what Attendify was. It was a mobile app and a web version that was for in-person conferences, so that you'd be walking around the in-person conference and you'd have your phone and you could like find where your next session is and look up the speakers bios on the app, and maybe there's a way to talk to people, other attendees, and say, hey, I'm over here, let's have coffee over in the break room after this session. Like, that was really what people would do with apps at conferences. And so quite a few, if not all, of the people I talked to had that already. That's what their business was. And so they were trying to pivot that and repurposed that app to be used 100% virtually, right? So things like getting it to work with Zoom and other live streaming and video conferencing apps. That was what that was an area of focus early this year. I know Attendify, they didn't have support for Zoom at the beginning of this year, but they added it, and so did a couple of the other vendors. And the way they added it was not always the same for individual vendors. I mean, the way Attendify did it, you actually had the Zoom call in line in the UI. So if everything worked out well, and it didn't for all of our attendees, but if everything worked out well, you could sign into Attendify and watch the event within Attendify and not even open up Zoom, and ask questions in Attendify, and there was a chat in Attendify, and just use that. Now, that didn't work for everybody. It didn't work for people that weren't using a modern browser. It didn't work for people that were on different, like Mac and Linux, I think. So and even for some people like myself, I tried to use it on Google Chrome on a Windows PC, and I still had to go into the Zoom call to see everything. So it was kind of hit and miss. But at least they tried to do that. At least they tried to have the video playing in line in the app. A lot of other vendors didn't even try that. They would just have like, hey, join button for Zoom, and you click that and it would open up Zoom. And that for us was less desirable than having it all be in one place, because we were trying to optimize for the least technical person. In the aerospace industry, not everybody is a tech person. Starting with Dr. Zubrin, he describes himself as a slide rule engineer. And I've been supporting him from an IT perspective for over 20 years, so I could vouch for that. He's not always great with technology, even though he's a very smart guy and a rocket scientist. And a lot of our attendees also fall into that pattern of they're smart people, but they're a little bad with technology. And so we wanted it to be very simple for people to get into everything. So that is what a virtual event vendors should do, is they should optimize for the least technical person. Another thing that was hard, which you wouldn't think would be hard, was just people logging into Attendify. Like if they had registered for the event in Eventbrite and we sent them an email and said, hey, thanks for registering. Here's the details to get into Attendify. Click here and log in with the same email you just used. Like that was hard for people to do. And also if they were using a different email, that was fine. And we had a little code they could put in, Rising Together, which was the theme of our conference, Rising Together. They had trouble with that. Like I'd say Rising Together in quotes, and people would put the quotes in. I'm like, why are you putting the quotes in? That's silly. So yeah, things like that. Just make it super easy for people to get into the event, put as few barriers as possible. Like ideally you could just send somebody an email and there's a button and they just click the button and they log in and they have everything set up for them. Like that would be the holy grail. And I tried to get to that as close as I could, but obviously when you have 5,000 people trying to get into something, you're going to get the angry emails that I can't get in and this thing sucks. And we got our fair share of those, I can tell you that, all throughout the event. So making it easy, and then that's the big one. Making it easy, making it seamless with Zoom or whatever you're using for the session, making it just seamless. And then the interactivity was important for us, being able to ask questions of the speakers. So we had Zoom webinars in the mornings for our larger events, our more prominent speakers. And we use the Q&A panel in Zoom, which allows you to ask a question, but it goes into a queue, and the people that are running the event can review all those questions and pick the one that they want to give the speaker. So that's what we did. It was questions from the audience, but they were moderated, and we were the ones asking them, not the audience members. That was important to have. As you can imagine, when we had our session with Elon, I was fortunate enough to be one of the people asking him questions. I had 500 questions to choose from in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them were terrible questions that I wouldn't ask Elon. They were embarrassing questions for
Mm-hmm.
Elon, you know, and you can't just have that be an unfiltered channel to go right to the speaker. You have to put some moderation on it, but you still want it to feel like it's an interactive experience where people can ask a question and it's really a question from the audience that the speaker is getting asked. So it's a balance. Um, so I like the way Zoom does Q&A. There's a way to, as you're getting questions, you can kind of mark, have they been answered or not? You can type in answers if it's a question that we're not going to ask a speaker live and I know the answer to. If it's a question that's logistical, like when's the next session and where is it? I can answer that. That's not a speaker question. I can just type the answer and it's done. And everyone could see the question and the answer, even not just the person that asked it, but everybody. That was great.
Yeah.
So having stuff like that, like the Zoom Q&A feature, that's not what all the software has. Usually it's just a chat function that is unfiltered and unmoderated. And that
There's,
really didn't work for us.
yeah. There's an interesting split in that you've got the Zoom Q&A, but you're simultaneously live streaming to YouTube. So
Yep.
you've got that chat
Yep.
and the Attendify chat questions.
That's right.
And Attendify
And
isn't
Facebook.
yet
Facebook was there too.
Facebook. Oh, see, didn't even know about Facebook
Yeah.
Live. So yeah, something to merge all of those questions so it becomes one community.
Yeah.
That's something I'm hoping
That
to
would
see.
be a great feature to have if the software was able to see, okay, you're live streaming to YouTube and there's a chat there and there's a chat inside of Zoom and a Q&A inside of Zoom and there's ours in the app. Well, that's four. And I mentioned Facebook. We actually had
Mhm.
five. Yeah, have that be one feed. Now our volunteers did sort of keep an eye on all those. We didn't always do that. Obviously Zoom was the primary one. And we encourage people, if you want to ask a question, go into the Zoom call and ask it. Don't ask it in YouTube because we might not see it. But we still did try to keep an eye on those. But yeah, that would be a great feature to have so that we're not having, as the event organizers, that would make our job easier.
Yeah, I think the high school girl whose question was answered by Elon Musk, I think she came from YouTube, and it made her year.
Yeah, that was a great moment.
So you implemented WonderMe. Did
Yes.
anybody get a chance to go into it?
That's a great
See
question.
that?
That was one I didn't mention. That was another networking tool that we were trying out. It's a tool, it's called wonder.me. It's relatively new. It's a tool that you sign in to the browser. It's just a browser app and you have a little map and I made it like a Mars base. And you have your little avatar and you can move around on the map and you see other people. And when you get close to somebody, it starts a video call, just like the one we're on now. You see that everyone's video at the top. And so it'd be a way for an attendee to have an ad hoc conversation with somebody that they've never met before. And you could have it based on how you organize that map. You could have topics on the map, and that's what we
Hmm.
did. And so if I wanted to talk about a topic, I can go to that area on the map and find people that are talking about that topic and have this real-time virtual experience, video call with them talking about the topic. Um, we were concerned about the ability for that tool to handle lots of people before the conference.
Hmm.
I was trying to get in touch with them. They're very early, uh, a startup company. They're very early at building the tool. I found out about it because it was used at an International Space University alumni conference in July that some of my colleagues at the Mars Society helped organize. And so they used it successfully, but they used it with about an audience of less than 100 people. So there was probably only a dozen or two in there at any given time. We were concerned because we have 4 to 5,000 people, and we ended up having 10,000. Is that going to handle the having a bunch of people in there at the same time, or is it going to be a bad experience where you're trying to talk to somebody, but there's 30 people on the video call, and some of them don't have great etiquette about Zoom. So, so we were concerned about that. We did end up using it. We did end up promoting it a little bit in Attendify, but we did not have a lot of people. We had some people use it. We did not have a ton of people use it, and I don't think it was a great kind of use of it overall. I wish we had had more time. I was trying to get in touch with the people that, the people at that company. I tried like heck to get in touch with them before our conference multiple different times, but they, you know, at first I didn't even have access to it because they rebranded themselves, and I lost the room I had in like August. I think I had a room there, and they rebranded it and changed their website, and then I lost access. So eventually I got that back, but then I couldn't get it. I couldn't talk to anybody about, hey, I have a really big event. What's the best way for us to use your software? I never was able to have that conversation with anyone, even though I tried. So we just kind of winged it. And because we were concerned about the issues I mentioned, having a lot of people in there, we optimized for not having a lot of people in there. And I think that kind of, we shot ourselves in the foot a little bit. But it's a great concept. I'd like to use it again. I'd like to use it slightly differently, and promote it more. I think it'd be a great place to go for people that wanted to keep talking after a session. If the speaker said, hey, I'm going to be in Wonder right after this, so come find me and we can continue talking, I think it'd be a great use for that. It'd be better than chat and Slack for sure. So
Yeah, my girlfriend's a neuroscientist, and when she saw it, it's like this solves the problem of virtual poster sessions, because each group can do a screen share, show the poster, and it's like wandering from one to another. And also,
yeah,
we're going to have the speaker, the programmer of KickChat, which is similar to Wonder.me, and he's going to be talking later in the afternoon.
yeah, it's great. It's got a lot of great potential. You mentioned you can share your screen in it. I mean, we could have done the whole conference in WonderMe if we wanted to. But and you have the video, you have the share screen, you have I think there's a chat function as well, so you get questions from the audience. So it'd probably work out pretty well as a lightweight tool. There's a little bit of anonymity with it too, because you can put in whatever name you want when you sign into it. So yeah, I could see it definitely being used for some virtual events, maybe not all of them, because there are some needs that it doesn't have. And it's only going to work in the browser, so you're going to have to be on a computer with a microphone and whatnot, not your mobile device.
Yeah. Okay. So for the Mars Society, you had this session scheduled back to back without any time between them.
Yes,
Issues with that, or would you do it again?
that was Dr. Zubrin. He's like, no, we're not going to have any breaks. Just go. It's going to be a smorgasbord of content. I think it worked out fine. I was pretty exhausted at the end of each day, but I had help and I was able to hand off certain duties to others. So 4 days of that was a lot. I do think I do think Zoom fatigue is such a thing. I think people do get sick of sitting on Zoom for hours at a time, no matter who the speaker is. Um, so our events are kind of unique because we have so many prominent speakers and so many people from around the world, and everyone's really hungry for that content. So I think for us, it worked out okay that we had it just wall-to-wall content. I think a more normal quote unquote virtual event, you would have things spaced out a bit. You would have sort of a break for meals. But for us, we were trying to jam a lot of stuff in there
Yeah.
for the 4 days. So I think we kind of had to do it that way.
Yeah. I know it took the first 2-3 minutes for it to go from 3 people in the room to 200. So had the issue of that physical time needed to switch.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, and there wasn't a ton of time for people to set up, and if they, if a speaker was having any type of audio issues or issues getting their presentation ready, I mean, that was happening during their time.
yeah,
So they had, and for the most part, we didn't have a lot of that. There were a couple instances, but for the most part, I mean, we had over 100 track talks. Those went pretty well. Um, but that didn't give a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of people scrambling, and I'm sure a lot of people were a little anxious. And our volunteers did great as well, but they were also scrambling a lot to make sure all that happened seamlessly.
mhm. So you based a lot of the volunteer scheduling on a Google Sheet.
Yes.
Are you thinking there's another tool that might be better, or
Oh
can you do
yeah.
things?
Yeah. There was no tool for that for us organizing the event and staffing it with volunteers and making sure that we had two volunteers in each track session at all times, four tracks going on at once for a whole afternoon and for 3 days. That was a lot of sweat to make sure that we had people and they knew what to do. Carrie Fay did an amazing job. She's a very experienced conference organizer for us, has done our event now for 5 or 6 years straight, and is just a whirlwind when it's an in-person event. She's always running around solving problems. She did a great job getting volunteers and scheduling them. And then I had a couple sessions where I trained everyone on how to use Zoom. We had a couple people that had never used Zoom before that were in charge of keeping the Zoom calls going, and they did great. But it's because we gave them some training ahead of time. And I've done training before, so I knew how to do that, but that was definitely like an advanced skill that software could help with. Um, yeah, they're having a tool to, manage the event behind the scenes along with the actual event software would have been very helpful. We did a lot of managing spreadsheets and sharing spreadsheets with people, and there were times where we overwrote the changes. I mean, we had scheduled changes during the event and all the way up to the event, last minute changes to sessions and speakers and moving people around. And whenever there was a change like that, I had to go update it in like 3 or 4 different places to make sure that the volunteers were aware of it, the official schedule on the website was accurate, Attendify was accurate, the Zoom links were accurate. Um, so I kind of held all that together and it was seamless, but a tool would have been really useful for me. So I wouldn't have to do so many manual steps for that. And I'm sure a lot of people would have struggled doing that.
Yeah, this sort of issue that's common with a lot of conferences.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason I'm doing this, to get the word out to the vendors of what we need.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. So Rachel and Maria, do you have any questions?
You're on mute,
You
Maria.
can unmute.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. Well, I sent a couple things through chat that Attendify. So is Attendify also an app, or do you have to use it on your PC or Mac?
It is both. Oh, sorry, I put a.
There it is. Okay. Yeah, because I wanted to check it out.
So it's primarily a website that you log into, whether you're producing the event or you're an attendee. You're going to log into the website, and there's a dashboard for the organizer of the event. There's an experience. There's actually 2 different experiences for an attendee. We use the one called the virtual experience that was new. There's also an older one that's kind of lower, much simpler, and sort of a legacy version of it.
Okay.
But then it does also have a mobile app component. There's an actual app in the Apple and Android App Store called Attendify.
Okay.
And I encouraged people to go get that and use it. It was slightly different than the web version. had a Twitter module that the web version didn't, but that was the only difference I saw.
Okay.
I think also there was a way to schedule a meeting on the mobile app with another attendee. If I wanted to have an ad hoc coffee or meeting with another attendee, there was a way
Okay.
to actually schedule that in the mobile app that wasn't on the web version. But
Okay.
I'm sure they're going to blend those. I mean, they're not going to have feature disparity like that long term, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And there was also, we didn't take advantage of this, but we could have purchased a white label solution. So we could have made Attendify completely look like the Mars Society, from the website address to the way, like no Attendify branding anywhere on it,
I see. Yeah.
to the mobile app. Like the mobile app wouldn't say Attendify, it would say Mars Society.
Oh,
We
wow.
could have done that, but that was another like $2,000 or something that we just didn't really see the benefit of using. And I thought it was kind of nice that we didn't do that for them, because they, like, we said Attendify a bunch of times, we talked about Attendify, and they really liked that. So obvious, and we kind of, we were okay with that because we really thought they were a good software.
Okay.
So it kind of worked out that we didn't purchase the the
Could've.
white label experience, but that is an
All
option.
right. All right. Thanks. Now I'll look into this. I'd never heard of it before now.
Yeah, I had not heard of a lot of this stuff before I started looking into it early this year. I should mention there was another event I organized in July for another group I'm involved with called the Moon Society. So big difference, right? The Moon Society, not the Mars Society, but it's a different organization. It's smaller. And I'm an officer with that one as well. And we had a conference in July called the Lunar Development Conference. It was the first time we'd ever done a conference since the year 2000. So like 20 years, we had not done a conference. And we decided to do that because that National Space Society one was canceled. We had some speakers that we were gonna participate in that. We had some speakers we'd lined up. And so when they canceled it and said that they're not gonna do a virtual event, we're like, okay, well, we'll do one. We're gonna start our own then. And so we did. And that was in July. And it was very successful, but it was a much smaller event. It was only 300 attendees and about 60 speakers. It was a 2-day event, very similar in format to the Mars Society, because that's how I planned it out, because that's what I'm used to. But we had lunar scientists and the lunar development community, companies were there. Not a ton of press about it, not a ton, like we really only had 3 months from the time we decided to do it to the event. But for that one, we used Zoom the same way. And then we also used another piece of software similar to Attendify. That one's called Eventory. I just put that in the chat. We had a bad experience with that one. So that one was hard to use. It was hard to use for attendees. There were some weird things that happened, like we'd put a Zoom link in and then it would disappear. And so I had to put the Zoom link back a bunch of times. So I'm not going to recommend that one moving forward for anybody, but that was sort of, I had back in March, I'm like, okay, I'm going to organize 2 big events this year. I need to look at all the software vendors. In June, I said, okay, Eventory looks good. Attendify looks great, but they're still working on their virtual experience and that's not ready. And they're also more expensive than Eventory. And then Eventory just gave us a free license at the Moon Society. So it kind of made it a no-brainer at the time. But after, when we did the event and after we were done, I was like, oh, that wasn't that great. Like that one, I wouldn't use that one again. And I gave that company the feedback on what we saw. So hopefully they've made some changes. But based on how good Attendify was compared to that, I'd probably just stick with them moving forward. At least that's what we're going to do. And there were a couple people that were involved with me at the Moon Society that came to the Mars Society conference. One of them actually spoke on a track. And he was like, oh, wow, this is like way better than what we did in July. I'm like, yeah, I know. So, so I think we're back at the Moon Society. We're going to do that event again next July, and we'll probably use Attendify, I would say, at this point. But we still have some time to talk about it and decide.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Sure thing. And also, there are a few others, but they're more expensive. Like there's one called Huva, which is the #1 in its category. Huva. And I talked to them, and they wanted like $5,000 for theirs. I should mention for Attendify, we had a discount, and we spent, I think, 16 or 1,700 total. Money very well spent. I mean, for what we got, the fact that we had 5,000 people in there, that was a good deal. A lot of these companies will charge based on how many attendees you're going to have. Attendify didn't. It didn't matter if we had all 10,000 people in there, it would have been the same cost. But Huva would have been like 10,000 plus if we had used it for the Mars Society. And it probably was comparable in a lot of ways to Attendify. I didn't go super deep on it because of the cost, but I know a lot of people are happy with it. Huva's good. There's a handful of others, but I don't know. I would just go with Attendify at this point. I'm definitely a supporter of theirs.
Did you have any experience with Spoka? Spoka Meet, SPOKA?
No.
Okay, I used them for an event. I couldn't stand it; they were awful. But
yeah, there were. I mean, like I said, I looked at 30 or so, and there were some. And I'm a tech person. I used to work at Microsoft, so I know how to evaluate software. I've designed software for 20 years, so I can see a bad piece of software from a mile away, and or something that's going to be really hard to use or really hard to maintain for a conference organizer. And so there were some I was like, oh, this is terrible. Like I'm not even going to go any further.
Yeah.
So.
Any plans to do meetings in virtual reality, like in Space VR?
Hold on one second.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an Oculus Quest. Short answer, yes. How? Couldn't tell you. That's going to be one of my projects moving forward, is how do we do more with virtual reality. I'm aware of certain like virtual reality chat services that are out there, like Space VR is one of them, where you can just put this on and start talking to people, like start talking to complete strangers. And there's probably some event software in there too. Obviously, we were going for people that don't own one of these. That was our audience is 99% don't have VR, but I have a very strong interest in VR for a lot of reasons related to Mars and related, like, so let me give you my sort of pitch about Mars Society and VR real briefly. Imagine if the first crew lands on Mars and they walk out of their spacecraft and they send out a rover and a couple drones and they sort of scan the area that they're at. And everyone back on Earth puts on one of these and can like walk around with them and explore the area. And you have tens of thousands or even millions of people exploring that area of Mars. Then you could crowd explore. You could know that area so well by virtue of people in virtual reality looking at everything. And then you could do something like, let's vote on where the astronauts should go for real to explore more, to drill for life or for water. That would be a really great way to explore Mars with people, where you have the backs of Earth right there helping you in real time or near real time. And then from a public relations or public outreach perspective, how exciting would it be for you to walk around with astronauts on Mars in, you know, live in a real place on Mars? So that's what we would like to do long term. We have a base in Utah called the Mars Desert Research Station, and we scanned it. We did a Kickstarter 2 years ago, and we raised some money, and we scanned that base. We flew a drone and got a square mile of the terrain in Utah that looks like Mars. It's desert and red rocks. And we scanned the base. We took pictures of the base inside and out. It's called photogrammetry. And so we have a real 3D model of what the base is like inside and out. And you can walk around in it in virtual reality. So we actually did that already. And so now what we're trying to do, it's really hard because we're trying to have volunteers help us. And it's super complicated virtual reality development. But we're trying to kind of build that out and finish that out and release that as a public tool. But I've gone to events before COVID and had one of these and had like middle school kids put this on and walk around at the base, and they're walking around on Mars, and 100% of people think it's cool. So it's a great public outreach tool, and I'd like to do more of that. And yeah, I think doing events in there, that's long-term what they're going to be, what virtual events are going to be like. That's what, you know, 10 years from now, that's what everything's going to be like. You're not even going to need to have a headset then. It's all just going to be like glasses or something, or, you know, just stuff in the room you're in. It's going to have a hologram. So yeah, that's the future of virtual events, is you're basically there. You know, you're sitting at a table with other people and you see them and you can't really tell it's a virtual event. That's the future of it all. So yeah, we definitely want to keep an eye on that and see where we can help enable that or help take advantage of the best parts of that for the Mars Society and what we do.
So on going forward for more down to earth, you see when there's in-person events again, going to a hybrid model?
Yes, absolutely. That's my opinion of what we should do for next year, is even if we're back at USC and we have a lecture hall and we have speakers in there and there's 200 or 300 people in the audience, that there's still an Attendify, and we have it webcast on Zoom and we have it on Facebook and YouTube, and we have thousands of people watching it and asking questions, which we can then relay back to the room. Yeah, that's what I think we should do. It's going to be hard. We're going to need to have people on site. We need to have really good internet on site, which sometimes is hit and miss at some of these venues. But I know USC is pretty technically sophisticated. They have all their classrooms already set up to record. So when we were there last year, we had pretty good recordings based on just the classroom was already recording everything. So I think we could do something like that at USC, but we'll see.
Great. James, thank you so much for spending this hour with us, and hope to see you in the forums.
Absolutely. And I hope to see you guys on Mars.
You know it. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.